Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, May 19th, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you about human augmentation, including the state-of-the-art in cybernetic upgrades. So this is going to be quite an in-depth exploration of what technologies are already available for people who would like to essentially give themselves additional abilities. And joining us today is our panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our current Vice Chairman and Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. Joining us from the YouTube chat is our Vice Presidential candidate, Daniel Tweed, and also our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, is going to be participating, hopefully. Our guests today hail from Augmentation Limitless and Symbiont Labs. They are Jason Hartgrave, Frazier Farrell, and Cassox. So welcome to all of you. We are quite happy to have you here. What can you tell us about Augmentation Limitless and Symbiont Labs? I understand Symbiont Labs is a new company that you are starting. When did that begin, and what is each of these endeavors focused on?
Hi, thanks for having us. I just wanted to say hello, and I'm glad to be a part of the show. I'm actually en route to an event that we're having for Augmentation Limitless and the new Symbiont Labs entity. And what I can tell you is I'm the newest one of the team. So the best person to, really answer the question of the history of like what Augmentation Limitless is about, and Symbiont Labs is the primary founder, Cassox. So I'm a new member of the team, and I can talk a little bit more about this situation of how I kind of joined it and why we're doing Symbiont Labs now and a bunch of other communications. But I really want to pass it off to Cassox, who has been in the industry more than a decade.
Yeah, hi, absolutely. Hi, I'm Cassox, and so I founded Augmentation Limitless, which is a community organization of biohackers, essentially. We've done a lot of really cool projects. There's biological-based projects. There's been a whole lot of different implants, and so working within this community, we've already done a lot of really cool things. And then this is Symbiont Labs is actually the first time we've gone kind of the business route with it. So we figured out a way to where instead of just doing cool things and doing cool research, we can actually try to turn it into an industry. Make it more impactful, because there's some really advanced things that I'm sure I'll end up discussing with you that we've done. But I mean, the reality is turning that into something that, just an average person who wants to do these types of things. That's really what we want to get to. And we'll get in there with Symbiont Labs.
Yeah, and I guess like one of the clarification points is really that what is Symbiont Labs and what is Augmentation Limitless? And really, this is the genesis of the cybernetics industry. So when we think about cybernetics, we think about augmenting ourselves with different capabilities and electronics. And we know that, electronics is getting smaller and faster. Eventually, we kind of want to put these things either close to us or actually inside of us to do various things and to interact with our bodies and allow us to express ourselves with new ways and have the tools really augment the capabilities that we have. And that's one of the reasons that came into play. And as far as the new name of Symbiont Labs, the idea of a symbiont and being in symbiosis with the technology that we're creating is going to be a very, very important narrative that will, dominate a lot of the years ahead. as the technology sort of gets, more and more complicated, we have things like AI, we have things like, harvesting data around us all of the time. And who's really designing a self-sovereign, what we call a self-sovereign cyborg future? Who's really thinking about these deep issues? And we realized there was nothing like that. And we also realized that there is the current regulatory environment with the United States made this industry hold back for many years. And perhaps like Cassox and Frazier can really talk about what the journey has been like, from the early days up into, the recent breakthroughs of what is going on now.
Absolutely.
Yes, that would be a great area for us to delve into. Essentially, how has the regulatory landscape and generally the landscape of opportunities that are available affected Augmentation Limitless from its early days to now? And how far have you come from your founding? First of all, for our audience, when was Augmentation Limitless founded, and essentially what were some of the key developments since that time?
Sure, I could definitely speak to that. With Augmentation Limitless, when we first started working, some of our earliest stuff were biocompatible magnet implants. They're pretty cool. People still like them. They're something that allows you to kind of pass your hand over any magnetic field, and it'll cause a vibration, so you can sense it. So even with that, going as far back as kind of those first days. We thought it was really important to try to meet regulation, to try to understand, the what regulations would apply to us and what wouldn't. And according to the FDA at that point, their answer was essentially that, well, what you're doing is jewelry, and this is not something we regulate. You don't have to worry about doing the 501k process or any of these things. Which is, it's cool, but at the same time, you've got to think that it's like, well, I think any device going in the human body really needs to go through that kind of rigorous process to make sure it's safe, type of thing. So from that point on, it's like we've tried to do a lot of the same methodologies that you would do if you were trying to make a device to go that were going to be marketed as a medical device. We want to do a lot of the same stuff, the cytotoxicity tests and that kind of stuff, but they don't really hold us to it. Essentially, it's not diagnosing and it's not treating an illness. It's not medicine, right? Now that was a landscape we're talking, that was maybe 2008, 2009. Now we live in an era where people are walking around with Apple Watches on their wrists that you can do cardiology by, and so, we do have regulation on wearables. With these various devices, it's not the same answer, and it's getting complicated because, while magnets are fun, I'm not dissing them in any way, but the reality is where we want to go is we want to have, really robust biometric sensors and suites. We want to have really good ways to interact with our body, both information coming in, information going out, things like this. And, it's at this point, it's kind of still in that gray area. It's never been addressed whether this would be permitted if you, brought a device to market and you sold it as a consumer non-medical device and people were putting them in, it's just something that's never been done. And so it's still, once again, a big gray area. And then, of course, if you were to do this and you were to bring this device to market, you're immediately going to also have that secondary issue of who puts it in. It's not a medical device, so are you going to go to a plastic surgeon and convince them to put this device in, or are you going to go to someone like say a piercer or a body modification artist? And in the US, that exists. Most of the body mods and kind of cybernetic bionic stuff being done at this point is being done essentially by body modification artists. And a lot of these guys are really skillful people like Russ Fox, and there's a few other I can mention. They're great at what they do. But if you're talking about going from this, very underground, people figuring out building circuits to interact with their bodies, blinky lights and things, and trying to bring it all the way up and create an industry where you could go in and say, hey, look, I want this and this and this, and I want it implanted in my body. That's a very steep curve to try to do. And so it's something that we never really were trying to, for many years, to try to push into the realm of being a product. There have been a few successful companies that have come out of kind of our community. For example, Livestock Labs is great. Amanda Plimpton and a number of other people came out of a group in, I believe, Philadelphia, and they were, really active in the community. Well, they made Livestock Labs to make these implants that go in cattle. And, it's a successful company. It's kind of growing. It's down in Australia. Of course, the original intent was to make devices to go in people, And, and I'll be the first to admit there's, more than one Livestock Labs devices, out there in people right now. Because that was really their drive, and that was how they could get to a device where they could do all the testing and whatnot. I think we're more fortunate. We found Roatan, we found Vitalia and Próspera, and it's just there's a really great, very progressive group of people out here in Roatan, and it allows us the kind of legal ability to both create these devices as well as to create a clinic where we can implant these devices. So at this point, it's kind of like, oh wait, the floodgates are open. It's it's stuff we've been playing with, and of course we've had there's a lot of interest. We get contacted all the time by so many people who are like, I want a device that does this, I want this, and now it's something that's actually feasible. I think it's gonna be a big thing.
Yes,
yeah,
thank
and
you.
Cassox mentioned something really important about the mindset that we encounter here in the United States versus in some other sort of more globally minded jurisdictions. And it's really sad that we have this pioneering industry of people that sort of want to push the limits. You have people that want to experiment, but even something like right to try cybernetic devices is just not something that exists in the current United States environment. And when we found enough of a critical mass of entrepreneurs and other people from around the world, we said, hey, this is an environment in a special economic zone where now we can take this underground movement and actually make this happen and develop safety standards and frameworks. Because as we all know, and as it's very obvious, that there's a big difference between, say, wanting to put like an LED in your fingertip versus sort of a pacemaker, right? One is, critical for life, and one might be an aesthetic to, show off a little identity of who we are. And, maybe we want to glow to music or some of these other things. And what we're seeing is, unfortunately, like the United States being sort of a damper on innovation at the moment and driving some of the things like, synthetic biology, DIY bio, for instance, and industries like ours, which are trying to augment through like physical, technology and components and chips into other places.
Yes, thank you. And based on my understanding, the distinction here is Symbiont Labs is a company that's based in Próspera, which is a special economic zone in Honduras, whereas Augmentation Limitless is a biohacker collective that's based in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So I think it would be good for our audience to also know what year Augmentation Limitless was founded in, and then what year was Symbiont Labs founded in.
God, I think we started using Augmentation Limitless, I think in 2008, 2009 is about when Augmentation Limitless started up. And Symbiont Labs, we just started this year in February.
Yes, so Symbiont Labs is very recent, but Augmentation Limitless has been around for a while, 15 to 16 years. So that is quite impressive. And you mentioned magnet implants were some of your earlier products or experiments. Jason Geringer wonders, what are some of the cool things that we might have the soonest in terms of people's access to them? Special tattoos or contact lenses with computer screens in them. What is available today, and what do you see on the horizon in terms of technologies of human augmentation?
I could talk for an hour on this. So do either of you want to take this first before I start yakking?
Yeah, I mean, I could. I suppose I should take a turn and chat a bit. So currently, there's RFID and NFC tags. that we've installed a lot of those. The company Dangerous Things that we've vended for in the past makes those primarily, and so those are for things like instead of using a key card, you have like a chip that has that same information in your hand, for instance, to get into like your place at work or your house, for instance. There's like finger magnets for like extrasensory perception. Lets you feel like electromagnetic fields, and and then for like the chips, there's also like data storage capabilities there, and that sort of thing. And we're developing more sensors. So we're developing currently a pulse light right now that uses I can never get this word right. Plasmography, basically, to like I'm probably mispronouncing that. To yeah, there we go. To synchronize basically your heartbeat to like blinking LEDs, essentially. And then we're also working on an implant that we call the Temptress, which is a temperature implant that we want to add additional sensors onto. And we're also working on our own continuous glucose monitoring implant as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I want to talk about the milestones these kind of represent. Because as Frazier was saying, kind of when this started, Dangerous Things, it's a good friend of ours, like Emil Grofstra. We're working together on a lot of stuff. We're going to end up doing a lot of coatings for his work, actually, a lot. But as he mentioned, each of the items that were at that point, when you're talking about things like magnets, RFIDs and NFC devices, none of these are powered devices. Okay, and that's pretty much as far as an industry has gone up to this point. Is there's a lot of cool things. So for example, the Apex Flex is one of Emil's more recent ones, and you can do all kinds of cryptographic functions with it, and it can function like a hard wallet for your cryptocurrency. I mean, they're really cool, but it's, once again, that's still below that kind of powered line. And what we're doing with the Pulse Light, it was actually, this is another actually community endeavor, and it's my friend Corey. He did probably the bulk of the work on this. He's one of our consultants, and really the drive here is this is a little open platform, and we have 3 different power modules. One of these power modules is going to be a supercapacitor unit. Another unit is going to be a lithium ion, and another is a different chemistry. I forget the name. It's actually a chemistry that is used in pacemakers, for example. So it doesn't have as much power density, but it would still be adequate for the minimal functionality on the pulse light. And so we actually have a person who's kind of specialized in working on these batteries. After we do some of the coding work and working with this, we're going to be doing all of the kind of standardized tests that you do with like an ISO standards, to where we're going to see how this stands up. We're going to stress test them. So this is where we're getting into more interesting territory, though, because when you go from that area of, hey, I got this passive device, in my opinion, a lot of those passive things, it's kind of like, well, I could have a ring, or I could alternatively have a belt buckle. I could, it's if you're into the novelty of the technology, it's great. People are excited, but it's kind of like getting a tattoo. Once you move into a power device, it goes from that to say something that can do active logging. So the second device that's going to be ready at GrindFest, we're actually finishing up the coatings this week, is the Temptress. The Temptress, it is an NFC-driven thermometer, right? So all it does is that you take your phone and bleep, you get your temperature every time you hold it up, and it'll log your temperature, right? Which is not terribly impressive, okay? Now, right there, though, that was really with our power unit. This is kind of almost a previous test of something else. But when you get to that point where you have power, now it's a whole different thing. If I can hold my phone up once a day and I can get a log that tells me, in 10-minute increments, the variations in my temperature. Now that's something that truly becomes useful. So that's our kind of 6-month goal, is that we're setting out some of our initial power units, which we worked on for years anyways. And then after that, it comes down to biosensors. That's our kind of phase 2, is that we've been speaking with a lot of different companies. Because what it turns out to be is that there are, a lot of people that come out with these really great new sensors, and there's no market I mean, you got to think that if this is a sensor that's intended to go in the human body, you have to get bought up, or your tech has to get licensed essentially by one of those big 10 manufacturers who make all the implants in the world, right? Well, guess what? A lot of the, they're not interested in a lot of these things that may have, enormous functionality and impact, on day-to-day life even, or, long-term health, because they specialize generally in a single-use function. This is a monitor, it's for your heart. This is a monitor, it's for this. This is a device that shocks your spine or does whatever. They're not looking at it from hey, let's put all of these functions in and make it so you have a gesture recognition on your hand and you can turn your volume up. Those would be the easiest things to add, honestly. I mean, they're not hard tech to implement, but they're certainly not a priority. This is not where medicine is going to go with these type of things. And I think we can do better, because I think those technologies are going to allow us to interact with technology in ways that we currently can't. It's going to be far more seamless. It should be able to have biosensors which are able to interpret things such as, are you getting sleepy? Are you aroused by a concept or an idea or a person? Are you, where are you in terms of like your metabolism as it varies throughout the month? I mean, these are things that are, probably not directly applicable to a disease process, but absolutely applicable to our lives. So that's kind of the direction we're going. Our big drive starting in August is going to be the biosensors, especially with the other project, which Frazier mentioned, is the CGM. It's an implantable CGM product. So, from my opinion, I really like when we were at Vitalia, there were a lot of people who are immortalists and life extension folk, and they really use a lot of the CGM. They wear those CGMs all the time, and they can get amazing things out of it. They'll talk about the effects of this type of starch versus this, and you got to think that if you had this fully implantable, something that all you had to do was scan your phone or lie down in bed and have your sensors read it, and it was that seamless, effortless. I think that we would really see widespread adoption of this type of technology, in meaningful ways.
Yes.
And also, I want to touch on something that you said earlier too about like, hey, we're just getting started with this biosensor stuff. And really, one of the unique things that is going to set Symbiont Labs apart from other companies is really we want the community to tell us the products that they want to see. There's actually so many possibilities out there. We're going to have to expand the community and to have the community understand that these things are even possible. Because a lot of people, when they hear cybernetics, they think of like, Blade Runner, like, 2049, or they think of these like far out things. And the reality is we have like incredible technology at our disposal right now that has never really been designed to be fit inside the human body and experimented with, because it's just simply been off limits. This has not been available before. And so we're really opening up the floodgates and the doors, and we're saying, hey, what is the future that everybody wants? What products do you guys want to see? And now we have the space and the location and the regulatory safety in order to sort of build these products and to deliver them to the community for what they want to see. So some of the earlier, I think, history of Augmentation Limitless that got skipped over was like, there was at one point in time, there was a Kickstarter for, I think, like a night vision project that Cassox can talk about. But people were like, wow, this is actually something that happened in the past that, we could try and recreate and see what happens. And that early experiment, while it, went a certain way, is indicative of sort of the mindset that we have now, in that like, hey, we want the community to tell us, we're going to try and make that thing happen. And now we have the ability in order to deliver these types of things. And we will continue to educate people as part of the process of being a startup and coming on shows like this to tell people what is actually out there. So I don't know, Cassox, do you want to tell just a little bit about that night vision project? Because that really might sort of let people know a little bit about how we think about like, hey, things that have already happened in the past that are really cool that nobody really knows about.
Yeah, sure, I can speak about it. Okay, so yeah, that one was, that's when I first actually got started in the community. That was before Augmentation Limitless was, kind of was where it came from. I had been reading, I was back in college, and I had been reading about how they had used conscientious objectors during World War II. and they did a lot of nasty stuff. They did, for example, they would cut them, and they'd have one group starved for a week, another group starved, and they'd essentially figure out like how nutrition affects healing times and things. I mean, some of it was pretty bad. One of the ones that were really interesting though was a night vision project where they put a number of these people on a vitamin A deficient diet, and then they fed them vitamin A2. A2 is a variant. It has a different absorption wavelength, so it's closer to the near infrared. So, they did these experiments. I, did all the Freedom of Information Acts and stuff. I've never been able to find the results. And so I thought it was really cool. And I suggested, we should recreate this, and I was really surprised by how the community kind of ran with it. And, I got a lot of people involved, which we ended up getting it crowdfunded, and we did it. And, it was really cool. I had a lot of subjective experiences. I've never really published the data because, it was kind of crap data, I'll be honest. It was that, we made this kind of data collection device based on electroretinography, and ERGs are notoriously kind of difficult to get even by trained people. So I used the open EEG platform and built like an EEG, and oh man, it was quite a project. And the reality is I think it's something worth following up on. I think it's a lot of fun. I will say that the experiences I had, I definitely think there was some stuff going on. I mean, I was running around people at night. The ARG things seemed to indicate that I was getting up to almost 850 nanometers wavelength light stimulating my eyes. But once again, there's problems with the testing methodology, so I'm not going to make that claim. I'd love to recreate it. As a matter of fact, another person who had trialed something similar was Mac Davis. He's one of my good friends. He runs MiniCircle. They do some gene therapies on the island, and Mac has been trying to get me to do some more of the A2 stuff, and I think we've come up with a way we might be able to actually do the vitamin A and administer it using ionophoresis. So instead of doing a big 6 months of vitamin A deficient diet, which let me tell you is terrible. But yeah, if you could eliminate that diet period and just essentially drive that vitamin A2 directly through the eye into the retina and get that effect, this would be a really viable, cool thing. I mean, I think it'd be really fun to be able to give people night vision on demand. And clearly it would require more testing to make sure we're not blinding anybody or anything. But it's the type of thing that we haven't previously been able to really follow up on because honestly, getting those reagents are expensive. And it's also doing even stuff that is very safe and self-experimentation. There's things in the States that make it kind of puts you in a position of liability. And I think that being now Symbiont Labs affords us the ability to kind of follow up on a lot of stuff that previously we couldn't.
And to me, I kind of liken it, if people want to think about it in a certain kind of framing, you think of the early days of 3D printing and some of the just like the very basic shapes and the basic things that you can make with 3D printers, and people are like, oh, I don't know where this is going. Is this like, is this really gonna, be that like real big change? And nowadays you're starting to see like the multi-material 3D printers and really like the technology just starting to unlock. So the early days of cybernetic design, may not be the most impressive devices. However, like we're just at the beginning, and the more that we tell people, the more feedback and the more ideas we get back, and the more that we discover. Even as we're going back through, like Cassox was saying in the past, of like, well, what biosensors are out there, and how many patents and how many other ideas are sort of just languishing on the shelf, and how many like sensors do we actually use in the context of animals, but not in us, that could actually provide us useful data. I mean, I think what we're saying is just like opening loops and conversations at this point, and like the product design is just going to explode as we attract more and more like engineering talent to this space. More people understand that there's a safe place to go to talk about these kinds of ideas and what they want to see, and we start like threading together and really talking with communities like the transhumanist community that understand like, hey, we can use these problems to solve, or use this technology to solve problems. And maybe some of those problems are inside of our own bodies. And, maybe there's powers that we really should have that we have like kept ourselves from. And all of these things start compounding, and these trends start to sort of, cross over. with the talent that we have, the resources that we have, and really the understanding that we have from multiple experiments that are starting to happen now.
Yes, thank you very much for that discussion. And indeed, the night vision project does sound fascinating. I think also it would be good to tell our audience a bit more about NFC technology, since this has been a staple of sorts of a lot of the implants up to now. And Daniel Tweed in our YouTube chat points out NFC stands for near field communication. Mike Lazine wonders, what does NFC technology include? And for instance, how can one program an NFC chip in one's finger or hand with one's debit or credit card information? I know some people have done that so that they don't have to carry a physical card around. Rudy Hoffman also wonders, are biometric implantable sensors now available? And he points out he just added an NFC bracelet with his cryonics data on it for $25. So an NFC technology doesn't have to be implanted. You could put it on a bracelet, you could put it on a ring or another object. But I would be curious to hear a bit more of an in-depth discussion about how NFC technology works. What are some of its advantages? What are some of its limitations? What can be done with it today? And what would require a power source? Because I understand NFC technology doesn't need a power source. That's one of its versatile strengths, but it could be a limitation in some circumstances as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as was said, NFC stands for near field communication, and it's a standardized protocol. The reason why using NFC is something that we're very interested in is because it's supported by generally every smartphone out there at this point. It's just very common technology. So there are other protocols, like the Qi protocol, for example, is going to be far better driving power to a device, but the kind of ubiquity of NFC is really the interest here. So when we're talking about the NFC, these are usually, once again, the unpowered devices. So with those unpowered devices, you can absolutely, you could wear a ring. They sell rings. People have belt buckles. They have all kinds of things. And in fact, NFC's greatest uses are generally in either manufacturing and shipping and things where, it's cheap. You can put them on everything. Every fifth towel that comes down the line getting cleaned or whatever will be scanned, or there's a lot that it's used for. So it's great if you don't want to carry around your keys. So I used to be an ER nurse and working in the hospital. That is one of the environments where, yes, everything in the hospital is essentially driven by your badge. It has a little NFC chip in it, and you walk up to a door and you scan your badge and the door opens. Or if you want to pull medication out to give to your patient, you scan your little badge. It was really convenient having it in my hand. I was walking around, every door opens, whip in my hand. Every time I want to log into my computer, I use my hand. It's incredibly convenient. So I think that, the argument that you could have it external and not have it be an implant is absolutely valid. There's no reason not to, and the utility of these things are entirely going to be based on how many of the kind of secondary devices you have. If you hook up your car so that it starts to an NFC, it's totally something viable, but it's not standard. It's one of these things where, it's going to depend. If you put a lot of effort into, building out your house to respond to these things, then it's going to be great. And they sell tons of these kind of peripheral devices, everything from, gun safes and door locks to, things that change what pictures on your wall. That's all available. And, certainly you don't need it to be an implant, but it sure is convenient. I think that when you think of verifying your identity, they're great for that. I mean, you have essentially a non-fungible token saying this is me, and sure, someone can cut it out or do this and this. So it's not like some ultimate security device or anything, but at the same time, it's more convenient than a key. You don't have to carry anything, and it works with a lot of stuff. So NFC is great. I do think that we're kind of almost at the end of an era where NFC is not going to be kind of the main power source. It's not that great at driving power. So, if you're going to be using something to try to charge an implant, you'd be trading off. It's like, sure, you could always charge your implant using a phone, but if you're going to have anything that's going to be running for let's say even an hour, that's just not really an efficient protocol to get very much power across. So, I think that, as we move forward, we're going to develop further protocols, things that, are better suited to our purpose. And as what we're doing becomes, more widespread, I think that probably it'll be our standards that will be accepted, replacing NFC. So yeah, NFC is great because it's just everywhere. And so if we have a low power device that we can power with NFC, that's great. We'll go there. But it's unlikely to kind of be our mainstay as a standard for power.
Yes, thank you very much for that explanation. And also, there's a lot of interest among our audience in continuous glucose monitors. Several commentators have written in the chat that they use a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, already. Some use a more old-fashioned glucose monitor. And I understand that these are becoming more commonplace. Previously, even a few years ago, one had to be diabetic to get access to one. I remember speaking with a young woman who had type 1 diabetes, and she was talking about how hard it was for her to get the CGM prescribed to her. And I was asking her, well, do you think there's any chance for somebody like me to get access to one? And I'm not diabetic. I'm a runner. I run about 40 miles per week. And she said, why in the world would you want a CGM? You're not diabetic. You exercise regularly. You're unlikely to become one. But it is interesting, in my view, to monitor these statistics and perhaps to catch certain trends, certain ways in which one's body reacts to certain foods and uses glucose in a way as to establish a more sustainable lifestyle and to know that one is doing it. So I'm pleased that this technology seems to be spreading, including to people who want to do it for monitoring, for more preventative types of functions. And I'm wondering what it would take for this kind of implant to really achieve kind of a convenient mass adoption, so that it's cheap, so that it's readily available, so that people can go ahead and get it without a medical prescription because they want to know, they want to have this information at their disposal. Any thoughts on that?
I think that, it is going to be something that happens over different phases, right? Your early adopters are going to be that group that I would say is health conscious. It's kind of strange that people demonize other people that just kind of want to know what's going on inside of their body, right? I think that it will be very strange, a couple of decades from now to, realize that there was a time when people were not monitoring their vital signs and people just drop dead from a stroke or an embolism or something that could be detected far in advance. And we just didn't put in the cheap sensors to tell us that, hey, you're headed for an early death, right? I don't think that anybody just wants to drop down from a massive heart attack or a stroke or something like that. But right now, we just don't have anything that's looking out for us. We can start small. The CGM is just basically, helping people that, have these either diabetes problems or even that have pre-diabetes to realize and the relationship between sugar and what you put in your body, has a result or an impact on the mood, the way you feel, et cetera, et cetera. And unless you have one of these devices that's sort of giving you this insight, you really don't know. You really don't know. And as somebody that is also yourself, somewhat healthy, I wore a CGM as part of Italia during, my time first meeting with Cassox and them. And it was really interesting for me. I wore it for about a month, a little bit less because the devices, unfortunately, that they make now, even the top premier ones, only last for roughly a month and sometimes even 2 weeks, and then you literally throw them away. But within that time frame, I was able to, monitor what I ate, and then I could see like, wow, this food actually really spikes up my blood glucose, and far more than it should. So maybe that food isn't the best for me, and it just sort of makes you aware that if you eat crap and you feel like crap, well, maybe you should stop doing that, right? And you become more conscious eater, if nothing else. And if everybody had that, it'd be great. But the reality is these devices are very expensive, and it's sort of like a luxury item right now for those that want to experience it without having the medical insurance pay for it and the actual medical need for having it prescribed by a doctor. So we need to make a device that isn't going bad after 30 days. So maybe something that lasts for, say, 2 years, or some period of time, and put it in there, and make it a little subdermal, so that way it's actually getting a more accurate reading and it's able to relay that data. So that device is going to require a little bit of time to build. There's a lot of market demand for that particular type of cybernetic implant, and there could even be industry partners that are already making CGMs or in the CGM industry that would be interested in developing a device like that in tandem with us that has the facility and the capability to do it.
Yes, thank you for that discussion. And indeed, we hope that your efforts will be able to improve the accessibility of CGMs. As you pointed out, they are still fairly expensive for a lot of people, hence the recourse to insurance. But Jason Geringer writes that he bets you, Jason Hartgrave, are right about this. In the future, people will probably think it's kind of crazy not to be monitoring our bodies regularly. And I would like to have essentially a screen display in front of me of vital statistics about my organism. Think about an augmented reality kind of interface where I would wear essentially some goggles and they would show me vital statistics. So here's my heart rate, here's my blood pressure, here's my blood glucose, here are other parameters that change over time, because right now with medical tests or visits to the doctor's office, we get snapshots in time, and those are not necessarily representative of what we do essentially on a day-to-day basis and how these metrics change on a day-to-day basis. So I think it would be immensely useful for preventing acute events as well as for improving health on an ongoing basis. But yes, we do need to still bend the cost curve down. And Art Ramon does suggest that for mass adoption, it would need to be surgery-free. So a lot of the current CGMs that are available are essentially patches that one could stick onto one's upper arm, for example. And my understanding is they're fairly pain-free and fairly easy to apply. And this is why, at least for people who can get them as prescriptions, it is a very useful device, and it seems to be a convenient process for them to utilize it. But implants, of course, they do require a more intrusive process. It almost seems paradoxical to ask this, but if you have an implantable device, and especially in the future, if you have a very functional one like a CGM, is there a way to minimize what people might refer to as surgery, to have some sort of routine procedure that's very easy, that's painless, at least within the proper setup, and that is also fairly reversible in the sense that if you want to get a new model, for instance, or the current one doesn't work, it needs fixing, you can remove it and then put in whatever else you want to put in. So I would welcome comments on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that design is absolutely the answer to that. Okay, so when you were talking about that, I was thinking about with the Neuralink, how even if the Neuralink they get it up and running, it's working fantastic. We don't really have enough neurosurgeons in the U.S. to where we could cause we couldn't put in enough Neuralinks to have widespread adoption. We don't have enough surgeons to do it, right? So of course the answer is computer driven or essentially computer mediated surgeries. And I think that along those lines, it's, if we're talking about advanced things, then at some point we're going to have that. But I mean, we're talking about very simple things here. We're not talking about brain surgery. What we're talking about is taking a device and placing it under your skin, right? And there are already ways to do this. I mean, when you look at ARFIDs today, you can look at how the devices in which they implant cattle, right? And I mean, they're foolproof. I mean, they're designed in a way that the angle of the needle compared to the hub, you can't even insert it too deeply and screw it up, right? Because they know the people that are going to be inserting these in cattle are cattle hands. They're people who don't have an education at this. So you make the way of inserting it, you make it so simple that anyone can do it. Is the idea, So I see it turning into something to where if we design these devices right, we're not talking about putting a cell phone in your leg or anything. We're talking about technology that's going to be very small. It's going to be something that is built to work with your body, to your frame, your shape, and it's something that should be essentially needle insertable. I mean, we should be able to do this to the point of where you go in and you get one of these things done the same way you get your ears pierced at a cheap place in the mall, where it's like people having the arguments, do you go to the cheap guy or the guy who's a little more expensive or whatever? I don't know, but I mean, I see it as being a simplified process. It doesn't have to be, when we say a surgery, I mean, if you drain an abscess, that's technically a surgery. So if we're inserting something in the body, it's going to be surgery. But I mean, when you have it down to the point of a small insertion gun, it's something that's viable. We could definitely use that. It would have a risk the equivalent of the same as people who inject themselves with insulin every single day to treat their diabetes. Is there risk? Can you get an infection? Can you mess it up? Sure, but a little bit of training, and yeah, I'm sure that we can do it safely.
Yes, thank you very much. And definitely getting an injection is quite a different experience from, say, getting cut up and having a major part replaced, getting put under anesthesia, for example. But you're correct. People get injections routinely. They get vaccinations. They get their blood drawn. And yes, some people do require them for maintenance, like people who are insulin dependent. So this is nothing new. And my understanding is for smaller implants like the little NFC devices that some people have had implanted, Zoltan Istvan, our first presidential candidate, visited essentially a facility to get a little NFC chip implanted, and he would have it.
That was me.
You did it.
Yeah, I did it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was down in my lab.
Nice.
Zoltan's awesome. I love Zoltan.
So this is already being done, and he didn't find it to be an onerous procedure. I think for medical purposes especially, people already have a tolerance toward injections. Now, Ben Ballweg does state in our internal chat, his impression is regular A1C testing is a pretty good proxy for a continuous glucose monitor, and he wonders what your thoughts about this are. He says, quote, "I'd rather we develop tech that doesn't have such a proxy." And the hemoglobin A1C, my understanding is it takes essentially an average of one's blood sugar, at least how it impacts the glycated hemoglobin in one's blood over the course of about 3 months. So if you have a glucose spike here or there, or if you have an episode of lower blood glucose than usual, the A1C test isn't affected by that. So maybe in the morning your blood glucose could be a little bit high because you ate a heavy meal the previous day, but the A1C test would still not be tainted by that in effect. So you could have, say, a fairly low A1C percentage, and that could give you confidence that you don't have diabetes or prediabetes. So what do you think of that as a proxy? Is there a benefit to a CGM beyond what, say, getting an A1C test every 3 months would give to a person who's interested in this or concerned about it?
Yeah, I'd say the thing preventing us right now from doing the A1Cs is essentially the technology for sampling it. And I think that it'd be great. In fact, one of the people we're working with, Dr. Barrett, he's a great guy, and he actually wants to run more with kind of the tie-in to the non-implantable CGM. The device that you wear on your arm. And the reason being that some of these things are very difficult to read internally. That we're somewhat limited in terms of if you're looking at things like glucose or constituents of blood. The approach that we're using for CGM is photoplethysmography. If you use light, you shine light, you detect it, and you see the changes. I'm not sure. I believe that A1C detection is based upon a reagent, and that's a reagent which gets used up. Right. So having an implant, then you're putting kind of an end life. It may not be the case specifically. I'm not remembering on A1C, but in many cases, the way these tests work is they have a reagent that reacts to the presence of this object. So you're going to have essentially a reservoir, and that reservoir will run out. Or and along those lines too, the microfluidics alone in trying to do a microfluidic device. It's just a matter of time before you're going to have something blocking your intake tube and things like this. So I think that some of these things, example being another one that would be great would be estrogen, testosterone, and the sex hormones. There are a lot of people that this would seriously impact their life to have more frequent. But the problem is your body's essentially made of cholesterol. And so, trying to use something like photoplethysmography to read it, it's just not the right approach. That would be something where, making a unit, I could, for example, see, and this is something we were talking about, was, the same way you have these arm-worn CGMs, have sampling of other materials. If you already have this small tube going through, you're doing the capillary collection, you're processing it. There's no reason why you couldn't do something like testosterone from serum, or do A1C from serum. It's not going to be the same value, but I think it's more likely we're going to find ways to correlate what that value is compared to blood value than it is we're going to make an implant that uses light to read those values. Some things are really difficult to read. And so, lab values, for example, they're not my number one goal or objective, really. I think they're great. And I think that as we, for example, Addy from LifeSci, he'd be great to get on here talking about this stuff. They do a lot of microfluidics work, and they're going in directions where, eventually we may get there. But for Symbiont Labs, we're probably going to go more in the angle of biosignals. It's CGM's great. Don't get me wrong. We have that project going, and we will approach these. But it's you could spend 10 years trying to develop a new technology specifically to figure out how to get testosterone from an implant. And our hope is that somebody runs with it and does it. But we're not those guys. We're the guys who are gonna put that implant into a device. So when you do biosignals, we've been looking at biosignals since the 50s. And we have so much information, and it's viable and it's accessible now. I don't have to invent a testosterone sensor. Instead, I can take a microphone and I can put it on your chest. And now we have voice commands right through your chest. And we have your heart rate, and we have your respiratory rate. And every time you eat, we know. And every time you drink, we know. And every time you urinate or defecate, we know. I mean, there are things that, the technology we're trying to bring up is great at. Unfortunately, A1C may not be one of those things. So I hope so, but until someone else probably comes up with an A1C mechanism to read, that's not going to be something that is, our objective. CGM, there's already a device on the market. It's called the Eversense, I believe, and they're using photoplethysmography. It's great. It's NFC driven. You take your phone, instead of poking your finger 3 times a day, you scan it, and you have your value. It reads out on your phone. It's a life changer for diabetics, So our idea is taking something like this, and having a more open source version of it, so that, people want to manufacture it and provide it. That's great, And if we want to take, something like a MEMS unit and a thermometer and a SpO2 sensor and a heart rate detector, and we want to get blood pressure, and we want to all put it on the same device, now that makes sense to me.
Yes, thank you for that explanation and for discussing some of the limitations of gathering A1C results via an implantable device. It definitely does seem like a test that one still has to get the old-fashioned way, going to a lab. Still useful for people who are really interested in monitoring that aspect of their metabolism. But given your discussion of how much these sensors are able to detect, John H. wrote in our chat, privacy is dead. And this is an argument, of course, that we've been having back and forth within the transhumanist community and with the general public as well, because the US Transhumanist Party strongly supports individual privacy and our control over our data. That's section 1 of our platform. On the other hand, we also want to dispel myths about which technologies can and cannot affect individuals' privacy in certain ways. For example, in Nevada in 2019, we actually played a pivotal role in leading to the amendment of Assembly Bill 226, which, as the sponsor had envisioned it, would have actually banned NFC implants out of concern that they could be used to spy on people. And one key point that we made to the legislators is there's no way that this technology has the kind of range that would be necessary for remote spying or remote monitoring. A cell phone is a lot more useful for that purpose. And I think the legislators understood that they should not be essentially interfering with people's rights to voluntarily pursue these kinds of implants. So, with regard to more advanced implants that capture vital statistics, including when one might eat or drink, etc., what are the privacy concerns, and what are perhaps some of the features of the technology that could alleviate those concerns if, of course, the technology is properly designed and under the control of the individual users?
Well, I think that you just sort of hit the nail on the head there, because if you don't have somebody that is really looking out for these potential issues, then what you're going to have is a cybernetic future that's seen now that are already harvesting massive amounts of user data. One of the reasons that we formed Symbiont Labs was really to allow the underground, sort of grassroots hacker community to have a chance at impacting, this industry's trajectory, and to sort of, build the world and the cybernetic future that we want to see. If you go to our, say, LinkedIn page, you see that we're creating the self-sovereign cybernetic future. This is something that is really foundational to our company, is the preservation of the user's rights and their experience as to how do they interact with these technologies. We're not putting chips in people against their will. We are having the people design the chips that they want to have, and to develop the feature set that will allow them to, have that data and control that data and interact with that data on their own terms. This is actually going to become really, really important as AIs get more and more sophisticated and more aggressive, and learning from different sets of data, like around your user biometrics. And if you see, like, say, the trends report from, say, the Future Institute, you're going to see that, like, we've already trained ChatGPT on the internet data that we have. What you're going to see is devices that are going to incentivize you to train on data that you're generating and other people are generating in real time that the current language models don't have. So this is a lot of healthcare data. This is a lot of biometric data. And you're going to see increasingly interesting devices that come out to try and incentivize you to give away that data. some of us, and I guess I speak mainly for myself in this regard, have sort of an affinity for, also cryptocurrency and, the ideas of Web3, which is basically sort of own your own data and, have economic incentives around controlling your own data. And that's also going to be a part of our thinking as we develop these devices and they become increasingly more sophisticated and able to harvest data. What does that mean? Well, for us, maybe that is the ability to interact with other people in the community in a willing way through something like a data union, and to establish, technologies and rails and integrations that really consider these privacy matters from a product design perspective. So built-in privacy. Privacy is assumed by default. If you want to give your power away or you want to monetize your data, you should be free to do that. Absolutely. But you should not have that data harvested sort of in the background. And, this is something that's a little bit different than, say, cell phone design and things of that nature. And it becomes super important because these devices are actually in your body, right? So it's getting the most intimate data available. And beyond that, I'll have Cassox and maybe Frazier talk a little bit about how the community views it now, and maybe like how we're thinking about it going forward. Because I'm just one voice out of many in the community that have these types of concerns around this technology.
Yeah, you're certainly not the only one. I would say that we're just now entering the era where the concern is real, because you're right. NFC technology, it's hard to make a door reader that that reads well when you walk through it. I mean, it's very difficult to scan someone without them knowing what you're doing, etc. Once you move into powered devices, all bets are off. No, it's a true risk. It's something we really need to consider. Part of how we are, developing our new devices and such is we have a fellowship program. And one of the kind of big, goals here is bringing in, Web3 developers and those who are involved, because, I mean, we're already seeing that kind of scary future start to kind of rear its head. I think it was about 2 years ago where Fitbit started to try to charge a service fee for you to access your own information. And it wasn't successful, and they did away with it, but they literally were trying to charge you money so you could see how many heartbeats you're getting per minute. And to me, it's like, wow, that's the beginning of the insanity right there. It's one of these things, and it's like the only way we're going to stop that from being the future is if us being at the bottom ground is we have the opportunity to set the expectations, right? And I really think that by making it very open and getting people in here, because now is the time when all of those huge ethical problems that people have written books about, to where it's like, what if you have one student and they've got the magic eye that can tell you this, and you've got the poor students who can't, and it's like, that's a real thing, that's a real problem. And that doesn't mean that we're just because we're the guys trying to drive the tech doesn't mean we're going to be blowing those away and being like, oh, that's nothing. No, it's real, and it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed, and I think it's great. I think that's one of the most important aspects of what we're doing is we're trying to be super open. Everything from our methodologies of creating devices, our the way that we're going to deal with pretty much everything is we're trying to do it all as open source as possible, because it's not that we're trying to rule this and make this company that makes all of the implants for people. It's like, no, we really want people to be empowered. It's hard to try to apply the model of kind of like the PC growth model, where you had all these kids that were playing with PCs in the 80s and 90s, and they had their hands on, and thus the technology went very, very quickly. And it's when we're talking about something that requires biocompatible coatings and surgery, it's hard to provide that. But I think we can get a proxy of it, an approximation maybe, create a kind of playground, a place where people who are bright and have these abilities can design amazing things, and know that you have a pre-existing kind of factor of safety where these people are going to be creating this in a way that you can do this. I don't know, but yeah, no, I find it scary too. I'll be honest that everything from the privacy aspects, a lot of the ethical aspects, these things. But the reality is it's inevitable. Even if we don't have these implants, AI through video can identify you. You don't have to have an implant to be tracked anymore. All you have to do is walk down the street, and the many video cameras that are going to be around cities will do it for them. So while it is something we're going to have to deal with, these are problems we're going to have to deal with no matter what. And I don't think that it's unique to the idea of implants.
Yes, thank you for your remarks on this extremely important subject. Daniel Tweed also points out there are a lot of as-a-service platforms that charge on a metered basis, and health monitoring as a service will probably be offering that pricing model. Of course, as long as there are alternatives to that model, as long as one could get that information in a manner where one owns the device and can harvest the data from the device at will, that could be another option. As long as there's competition in this field, as long as there are people like yourselves who are enthusiasts and who want to use this technology to empower individuals, providing options to people who do want that knowledge without having to pay a large corporation or go through some sort of institutional gatekeeper with ulterior motives, I think this could still end up being massively beneficial to individuals. I wanted also to hear a bit from you about the experience getting set up in Próspera, because Dan Elton, our director of scholarship, writes, "This is great stuff. He loves Próspera as well. And startup cities are the way to push this forward, in part because of the regulatory obstacles or conundrums that can be encountered in the United States, but other countries as well. In Europe, there's the European Medicines Agency, for instance. And I think having more jurisdictional competition is going to empower individuals as well to innovate in ways that, let's say, exceed the pace of conventional institutions in so-called more developed countries. So what has your experience been like with Próspera, and how easy is it? What are some of the challenges as well to set up an organization like Symbiont Labs?
Do you want to speak to this
So
point
it's
a bit,
been.
Frazier?
I could speak I could speak a bit to this point. It's very interesting. It was so establishing an LLC was a fairly easy process down there. And another very interesting thing is that when you create an entity there, you can elect your own regulation, which means that essentially you can look at regulations that other countries or jurisdictions have used when you establish a business there, that you can then use to regulate what you do, or you could make some kind of hybrid fusion of different regulatory processes that are tailored to suit your specific needs. And they're still figuring out quite a bit. We've met this team of lawyers called Ixion that are legal engineers that are really like delving into how do we establish like this body mod lab or this body mod clinic, that we've had a lot of discussion with them and people at Próspera about how best to go about that, because it's so new. They never had anything like this. So so there's a lot of different laws from different places that they look at, and we're working with them now on our on different aspects of our regulation down there.
Yeah, I really love the Vitalia people. Actually, it was we went down there the previous year or last year. We went down there for a summit, and we met a bunch of people. And I met Nicholas Enzinger. He's awesome. He's one of the big people running Próspera, and so he had contacted me regarding running a lab down there for their Vitalia event. And so our real intent going down there wasn't to really pitch a company or anything along those lines. It was that, we've been doing events for a number of years. We'll go out to DEF CON, for example, and do implants and different things. And so we went down there really just to kind of like, run the lab space and to help people with a lot of projects, and there were really some really cool like mini clinical trials and things that we helped run down there. And, a lot of kind of biohacker-esque groups doing different cool things, and but while we were down there, we got involved actually with a lot of really cool things. For example, we are working with Moondao. And Moondao, they gave us a small, what would you call it, a scholarship. We basically founded a makerspace on
like a grant, essentially.
Grant, yeah, that's it.
$5,000.
We got a grant.
Yeah, this is very generous of them.
Yeah.
Shout out Moondao, by the way.
Moondao is awesome, yeah. And so working with these guys, we've actually started working on a project where you would be surprised at the number of people that are missing limbs on the island. So just off the numbers on the island alone, I would assume that in Honduras, well, I won't assume, I've read the numbers, that, there is a very real problem in Honduras with access to prosthetics as well as healthcare. And so with Moondao, we've been working on a prosthetic project where the idea is to create custom prosthetics for the people on the island, and hopefully expanding beyond that to a larger scope, where using the 3D printers and whatnot from this doing so, and so we have gotten tied in with a number of organizations that already do these things, like Enable, and there's a few others, but there's already networks of people 3D printing and doing these things. And so being able to provide it on the islands to people in need and kind of being a node for these organizations, it's just another aspect, it's where everyone, it seems like on the island, is really driven to work together, And so, I'm just amazed by the amount of kind of, we've done projects with, damn near every other group in Próspera at this time. I mean, there's GARM, the GARM clinic out there is fantastic. They're doing all kinds of regenerative medicine practices, and they've got a lot available. And the people at GARM helped us with setting up some labs for some clinical trials. I mean, I think that the thing is that it's really interesting. When I feel like when we went up to San Francisco and kind of, pitched or something like that, it felt very competitive. It felt very, you're trying to make sure you're watching out for yourself type of thing. And when we went to the island, it feels like everyone is just trying to make everything work, and they want your help. So, you're half the time you're helping with other people with projects and their companies, but it's worth it because everyone is just so kind of, working together hand in hand, and they really want to make something big. They really want to try to solve major world problems. And it's kind of inspiring. I really love it. I love the people out there. And I think that, it's just a matter of time before Roton ends up being kind of the next, I guess instead of Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley, I don't know. But I mean, essentially, this is clearly going to become, like many of these pop-up cities and special economic zones. I think this is kind of the wave of the future. We're going to see a lot of technology being developed, and, the new ways of the future coming out of these areas where they're just not as restricted by, all of the accumulations of history.
Yes, indeed. And I definitely hope that Próspera succeeds as an experiment and that other special economic zones follow suit. Now, I'm also curious if you're concerned about some of the efforts of the current administration in Honduras of President Xiomara Castro, who came into office in 2022 and essentially wanted to repeal the law that authorized the special economic zones. And thus far, it's been challenged in the courts, and I understand she has not been successful, but she has her sights set on Próspera and other innovative concepts like this. So are you concerned? Do you see this as a serious threat, or do you think that she will fail in her effort to essentially deauthorize Próspera?
Having spoken with the folks at Ixion and knowing some of the people at Próspera and hearing from them, I find it highly unlikely that they're going to be able to get rid of Próspera. I think that there's kind of a picture painted sometimes online to where they make it seem, I've seen videos where they make it seem as if like, you have local Hondurans and they're, they're rioting against, what they see. And it's really not that way. I mean, there are so many people employed there and they love Próspera. They have, the Bitcoin Center. I met a guy and he was like, no, I love it there. I went there and my kid learned to, trade Bitcoin and this is, I mean, they really are providing advantages to the locals on the islands, and the locals recognize that. So I don't see as much of that. And in fact, I mean, the people there, the people that are running Próspera are Honduran. I mean, it's just a special economic zone. That doesn't mean they're not Hondurans that are running it, right? But worst case scenario, there's so many of these days, and there's so many of these startups and cities that are coming out, that I think that it would just simply be, an unfortunate extinguishing of one place where it's possible, but in no way does it actually stop us from moving forward.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that expression of optimism regarding the situation. And hopefully you are correct. And hopefully there will be enough individuals who are willing to defend Próspera in both the court of law and the court of public opinion in Honduras, because ultimately, if the crackdown proves to be politically unpopular, perhaps the administration will back down and realize it's not worth their efforts to pursue that. So now I would like to go to our other panelists, Art Ramon and Ben Ballweg, for their questions, and then we can go to more questions and comments from the audience. So Art Ramon, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier how surgery, being a requirement of some implants, is sort of a deal breaker, because, I mean, right now I could get my vision fixed with some sort of intraocular lens, but here I am with these, and I see you all also have these. So, the technology exists. It's, you're able to get it done, but we don't. It's major surgery. There's a cost to it. So I think that's something that you sort of need to see, the lens through, and see that that's going to be a roadblock for a lot of people. Anything that requires major surgery. Another thing I would see as maybe people would be hesitant to get any sort of implant is what sort of EMP protection it might have. Is a Carrington event going to happen, and is these electrons going to fry under your skin? Then it's going to be like in Revelations, where it says, people who have the mark of the beast are going to develop boils on them. So that's my other concern, because that's one religious people could use as an argument, because they're saying that's the mark of the beast. But just forget the religious stuff. I mean, what would you do if you have a degrading electronic in your body? I mean, how do you get it out if it's surgically implanted? Do you have to cut it out yourself like Rambo? Is that something I've been thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to the most simple installation method for these implants would be just like an injection, essentially. That is how some of a lot of them that are currently on the market are done, is a simple injection. And in terms of getting them removed, we part of our fellowship program is to have like other body modification artists and piercers come out and learn more about how to install these different devices, and also how to take them out. And taking them out is, I don't know, you could almost say easier in a way than installing them. Cassox could speak a lot more to this than I can, but if you know someone that has gone through this training and is certified to remove these devices, it's relatively simple and straightforward to go through that. You could speak more on that for sure, Cassox.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. There's always going to be people who are going to weigh these things out and come to different conclusions. I mean, at this point, the technology, I've thought of it as being almost like a tattoo, because you say, hey, look, I've got this implant in my hand. It can start my car. It can do this and this. And a lot of people, their response is going to be like, why the hell would you do this? Like, why would you want this? I could just carry a key. It makes no sense, And so, up to that point, it really has been almost the equivalent of a tattoo. It's something that it's a form of expression. It may provide some convenience, and in some special cases, in certain careers or whatnot, it may actually provide a vital function. But, we're talking about the difference between now, which is us just starting out and starting with some very simple things like lights that flash under your arms, right? To music or to your heartbeat. We're talking very simple things. The utility isn't there. It's I'm no way trying to sell people saying like, you should get this thing, it's so great. People who find this to be great will want to get it, and those who don't, they're not going to get it, right? When you move forward and the functionality comes down to, hey, look, we have years of data, and this device can predictively stop you from, or it can predict certain health conditions years ahead and guide you, and it can provide then, years of extra life. At that point, this may be something that's worth it, far more worth it. You're still going to have those people who are like, no, I'm not putting a device in my body, right? I think that, you're always going to have, a mix of these things. It's like, for me, for example, a lot of the biohackers in my community talk about wanting to get, they have the, I'm spacing on the name right now, but you get your, essentially for those with loss of hearing, they get sensorineural hearing loss, and you'll get an implant.
Cochlear implant?
Yeah, exactly.
Cochlear,
Sorry. And that would be the last thing that I would want. Headphones work so great. Why would you ever go under the knife for something like that when you can use a pair of Bluetooth headphones, And I'm sure there's going to be people who are far more extreme than me in the future and going to want, crazy stuff that I think they're out of their mind, you're always going to kind of have that. I just think that in order to create this, this industry, what we're doing is providing enough value that you're going to have a lot of people who it will benefit, and in no way is it something like, that we're trying to imply that, everyone is going to be chipped and everyone should be, or something like this. That's not the reality. You're going to have people that like this technology and those who don't, and that's just how it is. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people won't do it because they're afraid of needles, or because they fundamentally don't believe in it due to religious beliefs and things like this. And that's great. I mean, that's exactly, they shouldn't do it then,
I mean, the one I would consider, and I'm hoping the development gets there, is the intraocular lens. I think when I get older and then I start having problems with cataracts, hopefully the technology will be there that it could be sort of a smart, intraocular lens, multifocal and smart somehow. But then I'd have to worry, is a carotid event going to blow up my eyeballs? So yeah. I had to weigh the risk benefit. So.
Well, I work with a lot of electronic engineers, and they do a really good job in terms of their design on the circuits. There is a lot you can do where, I would say, there's still some concerns with battery and power, and those, there are concerns that haven't been fully explored. In terms of the circuit design causing it to blow up from a carrying event, it's like, no, we can already kind of circumvent that. That's not the biggest concern. But you're right, and the second thing is, I'm sure there's concerns that we haven't even considered yet. You were talking about like the electromagnetic fields that are created, and there's a lot of data that just doesn't exist, and research that hasn't been done. If you're carrying your cell phone in your pocket, your cell phone puts a lot of EMF, and I don't know the answer. I know that, for years people were putting funny little stickers that they thought protected them on those, but I mean, overall, we've decided that, as a general population, that we accept the amount of EMF coming out of phones with, the potential possibly for a small amount of harm. Would being under your skin be that much of a difference? Probably not with EMF. If you're talking about a battery, oh yeah, if you're talking about a lithium ion blowing up in your pocket versus under your skin, that's a big thing. I think one of the ones that scares me, because I'm really into the biocompatible coatings. That's what kind of my main interest in this is making things safe. And a number of years back, there was an entire line of breast implants that was taken off the market. And all they knew is that these people were getting more contractures and more breast cancers than normal, and they took it off the market only because of that. Because the post market, they realized they're getting more of these events occurring, and it ended up being that they had put a type of texturing. All it was a difference in the topology of the implant. The breast implant had the silicon, but it had these little kind of like topological shapes on it that was triggering cells to then, react differently than these other ones. And they had no way to predict this, And so, yes, this is something that, that people need to be concerned about, because there are many things that go on in the body that we don't have that yet. And I think, that is a field, it's something we need to be concerned with. But at the same time, we need to be driving this forward because, we need to find those things and then solve them so that we can keep moving forward. I think that these are all, very valid concerns, and they're things that, we definitely need to keep in mind.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's important to discuss these kinds of concerns and considerations here because a lot of viewers, including people who may be considering some of this technology for the future, are going to be asking these kinds of questions. And of course, the general public will be asking these kinds of questions, and working out these issues in conversations like this one will be imperative towards speeding adoption of some of these technologies. Now, one related issue is the impact of removal. So let's say somebody like Zoltan wants to remove the NFC that he had installed back in 2016 because it reads win in 2016. Maybe he wants a different NFC now. He wants a model that says something else or has a different, newer functionality. If he gets it removed, what would be the healing process? What would be the time that you would expect it would take for his hand to fully recover from that procedure, and perhaps then he could go ahead and get another implant? What sort of waiting period are we talking about before he returns to his prior state, or anybody else for that matter?
Oh, well, we could pop out the old implant and put in the new implant in the same day. And generally it takes about 24 hours for that incision site to completely seal over. And then after that, he just goes back to normal life. There's nothing much to it. With larger types of implants, sometimes with, larger things, there are sutures and there is aftercare, right? So, but that's mostly been because we've been dealing with, larger implants because we didn't have access to the technology to make it small. It was things that we've been doing that are kind of more, once again, milestones of way, before you miniaturize certain things. Ideally, I think that we'll keep our form factors as small as possible, and you shouldn't need suturing. But even with the suturing and such, you're talking about a maximum of, a couple days, take it easy type of a situation. This isn't in any way, shape, or form a major surgery. This is the type of thing that they can do in an ER effortlessly. I mean, it really is. It's, what you do is you take a small, generally a scalpel. Some places don't allow for scalpels depending on where you are. But if it was a body artist, they might use a number 4 gauge needle, alternatively. But you simply push on it because you can feel it. In fact, I've got one on my arm and I can push on it and it kind of pokes out, and you just go boop and then pop it out. And that's it. It really is that simple, And then if you were to be, placing a new one, you have your little magnet, your little needle insertion, and you just find that hole and pop it right back in. I mean, these are very, very small, and it's very innocuous. That isn't to say it will always go that direction. I'm sure that as we, move forward, when you're talking about powering things, there's power density. So you have to have a certain size if you're going to have devices with a certain amount of power. There are some really cool new techs out there. There's some kind of like power cast technologies and such, where we've been able to power things, from a backpack, so you could theoretically carry a power unit in a backpack, and it's putting up a bunch of, an electromagnetic field that's powering your devices in your hands and things like this. Alternatively, you could have clothing which incorporates coils. I imagine we'll eventually have just a mix of different ways of kind of powering these things, and the device will essentially, be powered by a mix of them, and in the future, of course, there's all kinds of cool technology that's, not quite there, ways of powering things through, movement of your body and stuff like that. And that's still, maybe an order of magnitude or two below what we would need to power a device. But I think that, seeing the applicability, if we had a lot more applications, 24-hour, biosensors, seeing that those applications are there, people would have a greater drive to develop these technologies. So, yeah, I hope that answered that.
Yes, I think that's a very helpful answer. Now, another question along these lines comes from Spatiality, who says she would be concerned for perhaps some of the materials from the implants leaking, or the body rejecting the implant and the immune system attacking it, or the corrosion when it comes into contact with the body's acids and oils. Of course, the immune system tends to have a habit of attacking foreign objects within the body, and immune rejection is a big problem, say with implanted organs, even biological organs that are not genetically identical to the host. So how would, especially in the case of more advanced implants, these kinds of problems be addressed? I understand, of course, for a little NFC tag, probably the body will adapt to it. But what about a bigger implant, especially a more functional one that has components that include a battery of some sort?
Yeah, this is really
Well, that's
biggest.
why.
Go ahead, Frisch. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's why testing is, paramount to what we do, and it's very important that we also use like appropriate like coating materials that are biocompatible to coat our implants before they go in, and it's and that's why we're also going to be testing them, employing like cytotoxicity tests, tests that are used by facilities that like want to get FDA approval. We're going to follow like some similar guidelines there, and like ISO testing guidelines and that sort of thing for our devices.
Yeah, the 501k process is we're doing a slightly modified 501k type process. So it's meant to be done a bit faster, but it's once again the cytotoxicity testing and all of these tests and blah blah blah. But even with that, I still think that I think that she's right, that this is a concern, and I'll tell you why. Is they still make gold coated pacemakers. And the reason is if, regardless of what kind of biocompatible coating you're using, someone out there is allergic to it. Okay. There's humans are unique, and there's always going to be someone who, for one reason or another, their body figures out, hey, look, this is some plastic thing over here. We should get rid of it. Okay. And this is always going to be a concern. We have, so far as humans, we have not identified a perfect biocompatible material that your body will just completely ignore. But that said, there's a lot that can be done with this. I think that in terms of leaking and things like that, those are all things that have been solved. I mean, you've got to think we've made pacemakers since the 68 or so, a little earlier. But we've been doing implants for a very long time, and we're actually really good at it. Titanium knees and this. In terms of reactivity, if you go look it up, yes, there's always going to be something here. Okay, there are people who have reactions to the titanium in their hip implants. So we're fortunate, however, that we're not doing hip implants. We're doing things that are generally placed under the skin. And so if a person is having a reaction to it, it's very simple. You go and you have it removed, right? And so, it's one of these things where, as long as your design is good in certain ways, I mean, I'll say, I still think the biggest concern here is going to come down to battery and battery chemistries. That still remains one of the larger risks in medical devices as well, right? But God, we went to this medical conference, or I'm sorry, biomedical battery
it
conference.
It was like a medical device conference.
Yeah, they and these batteries, they've come so far. I mean, they're using chemistries that no longer outgas. They're batteries that you can literally take a pair of scissors and cut off a square, and it'll have the voltage that you want to have. I mean, this technology is advancing. As biohackers, in Augmentation Limitless, we didn't really have access to those batteries because, we were working, from essentially a community organization. But now that we're functioning, and we're doing these implants, we're working with other companies, we have access to these technologies. So yes, batteries can be dangerous. You're always going to worry about things leaking. You're working about this. But I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, you would worry about that with any device. It's not novel to what we're doing. You certainly don't want your pacemaker to leak. You don't want any of that. Yeah. But no, it is something that moving into the future, hopefully we can start working in different materials that aren't even being used yet. I mean, there's so much that, material science is about 20 years ahead of what's actually being done with these, implants today. So, I mean, we actually have the option of, instead of using what the FDA is currently saying is great, we can work with these companies who are working with materials that are way ahead of the curve. So, in theory, our devices should be able to do things that or be safer than what is currently being produced. We'll see.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for that thorough reply. Mike Lazine writes that these are good points on hip replacements and pacemakers, giving us some ideas on how the body would respond to certain cybernetic implants, and the fact that essentially our medical technology has become fairly adept at mitigating at least the problem of immune rejection for certain advanced implants. Many people get knee or hip replacements, for instance, and most of them receive sufficient care to alleviate the problem of immune rejection. Now, we do have some interesting comments in the chat from our viewers. Now, Mike Lazine, this has already been addressed. Jason wonders about tattoos and artificial skin. Can something like that help keep us warm in cold weather? Has there been any sort of work on essentially temperature modulation or any implants or technologies that could help with that? Of course, clothing is a technology like this, and I wonder if the biohacking community has deemed that to be sufficient.
Oh man, you know what? No, there's because we're talking a lot about implants right now, but I would say in the biohacking community, implants is only one approach. And there was a few years back, I think it was one of Rich Lee's projects. Actually, was a DMP-based project where they were dosing with a chemical called dinitrophenol, and it raises your body temperature to the degree of which people can die from DMP. It can be dangerous, but used properly, I mean, they were raising people's body temperature to very high degrees chemically. Once again, if we're talking about things like artificial skin and whatnot, there have definitely been some skin projects that I've seen people work on. I kind of doubt that, because you got to think in terms of like power, producing heat electrically and, kind of the implant approach, trying to increase your body temperature. It's just not a very efficient way to do it compared to the external, and, we're not trying to kind of do the Swiss Army knife thing of, hey, look, we've got implants that do everything. I don't have to eat. I don't have to sleep. I don't have to, it's kind of trying to do that approach. It's like when you have clothes, I think probably clothes are okay. That isn't to say that people haven't played with the idea of altering body temperature, but it's generally been chemically and for certain purposes, like, I want to lose a bunch of weight in 5 minutes or something like that. But yeah, I think that the biohacking community in general is so much more than just implants. Augmentation Limitless, I would say most of the people working, within that commune, it's kind of a tech commune, are very oriented towards that tech. And sometimes it's easy to get lost in that, to where you're like, what else can we solve with this? But, sometimes really you can use a car key and it's okay.
Yes, indeed. Sometimes, indeed, the simpler technologies could be the more practical ones for particular purposes. And with regard to implants or other emerging technologies, it's worthwhile to think, what are the unique problems that these technologies are suited to solving? Now, we also have some comments from our friend Rudy Hoffman. He writes, I like the ideas here. It does seem that this is at the leading bleeding edge phase. So we are talking about some technologies that are really on the cusp of what is possible today. And this is much appreciated that we are getting insight into this realm. He also writes, there are so many things happening in our bodies that we are ignorant of, and he's glad that you are making good things happen in this space. So thank you very much to Rudy. And on the subject of privacy, our friend John H. writes, even though he is concerned about privacy, he doesn't mind if his data would be added to an anonymized compilation. So as long as the individual identification is taken out of that. And we had an interesting virtual Enlightenment Salon on this subject on big data, artificial intelligence, and longevity with Didier Kernel on July 11th, 2021, where he essentially proposed a system of anonymized data collection for purposes of analyzing essentially health information at a population level without compromising the privacy or identities of individuals. So that's a fascinating discussion for those who are interested. And now I wanted to see if Ben Ballweg had some questions for you.
Thanks for being here today, guys. I particularly appreciated you were saying something along the lines of that if people decide they don't want to take up the technology that is offered, that the playing field should stay equal. And I know that with transhumanism as well, that we want to make sure that people want to have life extending technology. Sure, go right ahead, but you don't have to. You're not going to be looked down upon and that kind of stuff. So I was curious how you guys both got into this movement, and if you happen to have an interest in life extension and keeping on living, or if it's more like, nah, you just want to be able to do cooler stuff while you are alive. I'm particularly interested with our background, Cassox.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really love longevity. I think I think that I think that's one of the main drives for what we're doing here, is that, while essentially the company is non-medical based, but the idea here is that by incorporating technology, we're going to be able to monitor the body better and to interact with the body in ways that should lead to us living longer. I mean, by having that data where it could go either way. I mean, it could be scary. I mean, I can imagine a world where this type of technology is eventually going to be predicting cancers 5 years ahead of time from what we can do now, versus we have the same technology being used to cancel your insurance 5 years ahead, without you knowing why. And it's like it can kind of go either way. And so I think that making sure that its technology is in our hands, we're the ones in control of it, it's our data. I mean, even kind of the way we've been talking about this data is that, oh, well, I would let people use my anonymous data. No, your data has value. I mean, this is not something you should be paying for. This is something that someone should be paying you for. This is your data, right? And does it have value? Sure, it has value to medicine. It has value to many people. I actually foresee, I would say, I think that we'll move in the direction of where, yes, you'll have the option to have your data anonymized and used by, say, nonprofits or for medical research and things like this. But, even more, I think we're going to have it to where you can get paid to have your data used or included. And I think Jason was actually talking about this a bit as well in the beginning. I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, even talking about kind of like the skin thing, the idea of like, becoming warmer. I don't know. It seems to me that it's like I perhaps am less tech inclined than people expect, because my idea of these implants in the future is not that I'm going to have a bunch of gadgets and they're going to be, distracting me and doing this. I'm sick of the fact of like, I'm looking, I'm stuck on my phone all day long, and it's not because I want to be. It's because, that's how I interact with my world. I got to text people. I got to do stuff. I want this technology to be seamless to where, I go to sleep and the stuff that's built into my bed, powers it and downloads my data and does whatever and does these things. I want, for me to have less technology within my kind of periphery. I want the technology to be part of me in a way that it makes it seamless and effortless. Instead of being gadgets, I want it to be, something that's seamless. I guess that's the whole thing. I keep saying the same word, but yeah, I the way I envision it is going to be that it's just such a simple thing, and it's just such a given that, you'd want this technology. Of course, you have people who don't take it because of religious convictions and things like this. But I mean, ultimately, it's like, yeah, I mean, you're going to be talking about how you communicate with others. We don't have to have these devices we carry around all the time. We don't have to have these certain things. It's going to make it to where it's more of a natural interaction while still having all the benefits of the technology we have around us. I want that simple kind of life where I'm almost like a villager. I wake up, I go jump and swim in the water, and I do all this stuff, and yet I still want all the advantages of modern society, right? So, if you have an implant, it's like, yeah, you can jump in. If I've got my cell phone and my this and my this and my this, it's the idea is more one of shearing away the apparent technology and making it more seamless and kind of more symbiotic with us, right? So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. And it is indeed a fascinating vision of a future where technology gets integrated into the human organism so that we more directly gain these capabilities instead of relying on as many external devices as we do. And the relationship between the human organism and technology, both internal and external, is going to evolve in some quite fascinating and thought-provoking ways in the years and decades to come. I wanted to give you the opportunity to discuss GrindFest, which is happening shortly between the 24th and the 26th of May. What could you tell us about GrindFest? What will happen there? And if anybody is interested in attending, what do they need to do?
Totally. You want to talk about it first, Frazier?
Yeah. So GrindFest is it's kind of like an unconference sort of a thing that we hold out at our lab space in California, which is about like 2 hours north of Los Angeles in this town called Tehachapi. And we have people come out. We give talks. There's implants. We talk about the latest projects that we're working on. Like the pulse light is going to be featured there, for instance. And we just like network with other people. And again, there's always new people showing up, and we just kind of collaborate on different things as a community, and it's a place where we can exchange ideas and also just kind of hang out and get to know each other as friends. And you can, if you'd like to RSVP, you can go to grindfest.org and click the tab that says RSVP here. And there's also we have like a Discord server for it. That's a dedicated GrindFest Discord server now, and also our own Augmentation Limitless Discord server that has a GrindFest channel that has a lot more info and details on like carpooling and that sort of thing.
Yeah, GrindFest is cool. This is GrindFest 9. So we've been doing GrindFest now for 9 years. Next year is going to be the Big 10. We're planning for it. So we have done a lot of firsts here. For example, the peg leg implant was first done here. It's when the community gets together and we have the ability to both do the procedures and to fabricate the electronics. I mean, those are the days it happens. So there's generally a lot of work and design work done ahead. So for example, at this GrindFest, we're going to be doing, as we were talking about earlier, the temptress implant, and we also have the pulse light implant. And so both of those, we're going to be testing them out and dropping them into willing participants and such. So that'll be fun. We generally have a lot of kind of cool peripheral stuff that's associated. So we always have a pretty big nootropics bar, and we usually have some pretty good speakers down here. We had Zoltan down one year. That was when he got his implant in, and various other folks. So this year, the theme is actually, what is it? Legal. It's legal themed, right, Frage? What's the...
Yeah, it's law and disorder, as the clever name goes. So yeah, we're talking about, like the legalities of the biohacking space and of the implant space, and this kind of gray area that we live in, and why we, I thought it wise to go down to Próspera and take advantage of their regulatory system there. So there will be some attorneys we actually met down there from Ixion that I mentioned earlier that are going to be speaking during GrindFest, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Very interesting. And hopefully some of our viewers will be able to make it and report back to us about some of the presentations and the demonstrations that are provided. Jason Geringer wonders, how did you come up with the name GrindFest?
So it's from the origin is in a comic book series actually called Dr. Sleepless, and that comic book is about like transhumanists, and the main character is this like a doctor, like a self-taught like surgeon that like puts all these wacky implants in people, and like in this future, like implants are way more mainstream, but this guy tries to like push the limits And his people are the implant enthusiasts in this universe are called grinders, because I don't know, they grind out these implants and like cut into each other and like that sort of thing. I guess that's where the Warren Ellis, the guy that made that, like came up with a name from. And so that's where the name Grinder comes from, actually. And this is before like the dating app and all of that stuff that's associated with it now. So at least it makes it interesting when you tell somebody about it, because the name like kind of grabs you. So I guess it's kind of good in that regard.
Yes, indeed. So the Dr. Sleepless Volume 1 is available on Amazon, and it was released in November 2008. So kind of close to when Augmentation Limitless was founded.
Yep, that was definitely there. And then about 2 years later is when the Grinder app came out. So we talked about changing the name and stuff like that, but it is what it is. We're just gonna run with it. We actually have another one because the GrindFest is great. GrindFest is awesome, but it's really kind of like a very large, elaborate surgical house party where so we've talked about trying to expand it out and make it into something more, but I don't know. I think it's going to stay kind of what it is. I think that now that we've moved out to Roatan and we have Symbiont Labs, we actually are doing another annual event. It's called right now we're calling it the Human Augmentation Summit, and it's going to be the the July 26th weekend, I believe, and week. And so the Human Augmentation Summit, we're bringing in a lot of big speakers and stuff like that, and it gives us the opportunity so we can kind of expand on it. I think that GrindFest, I was trying to tell, because we have a lot of our friends that we met at Vitalia and Próspera are coming down to GrindFest, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But I had to really emphasize to them that it's like, this is a cyberpunk party, and we kind of heavily emphasize that punk part at times. So it may not be what you expect, it's a lot of fun. You guys should definitely come check it out.
Yes, so the Human Augmentation Summit is going to be in Vitalia during July 22nd to the 28th. Here's the link for those who would like to register for that. So we have today, and I would like to thank you, Cassox, Frazier, and Jason Hartgrave, for joining us and for the fascinating conversation. I will welcome any closing remarks. One interesting idea that our viewer Spatiality discussed is the possibility of these implants helping people with disabilities. So not just healthy consumers who want to augment themselves, but perhaps people who have some issue that they would like corrected or mitigated. So what are your thoughts on this, as well as any other thoughts you'd like to share in the remaining 2 minutes?
I think that go for it. Sorry, Frazier.
A lot of people in our community are very interested in this aspect of grinding and biohacking, and that's part of the reason why some of them got into this, actually, is because they're trying to figure out a way to compensate for some of these things that they're dealing with. And we actually had a talk about like grinding and like disabilities like a couple of years ago, I want to say. It was like a whole discussion that we had, and I think we'll definitely see it used to assist with like different handicaps. And like, for instance, like the Neuralink people, their whole idea of, one of the whole ideas of going into the brain, right, is to try and help people that have like different like nerve impairments or different like motor disabilities, for example, or cognitive issues. The idea is that this like BCI, or this brain implant, can assist with that. I mean, we're not in that space. That's a little above us, but that's one example that I can think of. I'm not sure that having like a magnet implant would help if you have like a nerve like issues. Probably not, but maybe. Yeah. Yeah, you want to speak more about that, Cassox?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the thing is people who are suffering from disabilities are often going to be the first adopters of technology like this because it matters to them more than anyone else. So yeah, and it's interesting. Those are two things we notice in our community that we have. We have a lot of people with disabilities and we have a lot of people who are trans. And it seems to me that these are both communities which, have a lot to benefit. And they have people who are viewing kind of the human body and how we interact with the human body already in a different way than most people are. I mean, conceiving of it and saying, hey, look, gender is a thing that I can alter with the right technology. It's like, well, that's a kind of advanced way of thinking about things, and so we tend to get a lot of both. There's some great speakers. Oh God, I'm trying to remember this guy's name. I mean, the guy with the cyborg eye that he made, and there's so many
Neil
people.
Harbison.
Well, Neil's a different guy. I love Neil. Neil's awesome too. I do know Neil. I'm thinking of somebody else, but yeah, Neil also has the color vision. I think these people are in many cases going to be the first adopters, both because it's obviously most vital to them, but also because sometimes that disability is what's providing the opportunity. A lost tooth, and if you get a dental implant, it's like, well, think about it. We could use that dental implant for all kinds of things. So while it sucks to lose a tooth, in a certain way, it's an opportunity, right? And
Yes.
it's like I certainly would not want to be blind, but once we move into an era where we can correct that, the blind people are going to be the ones with the very best vision. They're going to be the ones with the newest and best technology in their head. It's going to go the other direction. So I don't know.
Yeah. And I think we definitely look forward to that kind of future where these individuals will be at the forefront of what is possible, as are you. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that we can all live long and prosper.